Hi everybody, it is Sunday morning and as of yet I have no idea what's on my agenda for today, but I do feel like it's been a while since we've done a trip around the world and I feel like I've got a few things to talk about, at least in some of my tanks. So we are going to get started here with my 40-gallon Waterfall tank as we usually do. Now yesterday I shot the opening sequence of a video that I never followed up on. The tank needed to be topped off. The water level was about 4 inches, maybe 5 inches lower than it normally would be. There was a reason for that. We'll get into that in a moment. But I was going to do the big water change. I was going to gravel vac it. And most importantly, what I was going to do, what I kind of felt like doing yesterday, was addressing my plants in the sort of upper portion of the waterfall area. My dead nettle there just needs some attention. You can see all of the dead stuff hanging there, all that brown stuff hanging there. I'm just really bad about watering my houseplants. Typically houseplants die from overwatering, but mine often get neglected. I'm so good at not overwatering my plants that they often get underwatered. And in this case, again, it's not the right kind of environment. This is a plant that is supposed to die back and go dormant every winter, and it will come back nice and green and lush in the spring, but I've just been forcing it to keep going and going and going. And I don't know, maybe it's part of it, maybe I'm not watering it enough, but I need to clean that up. Also need to get this daylily out of there. It's done. It's getting worse and worse every day. There's no more real new growth coming out on it. When there is new growth, it's really pale. Part of that is probably lack of nutrients, but part of it is also the fact that this is a plant that needs to die back and be sort of frozen over on the winter, and then it'll come back in the spring. And again, I've just been forcing it on these 12-hour days and nice warm temperatures month after month after month. And we've gotten it all the way through till January, so I mean, that's pretty good. But I just think it's done. I think it's time to move on from this one. And what I was going to do yesterday was go out in the yard and try to dig up some frozen bulbs, put them in my Bilko door area for a couple of days to sort of bring them up to, mid 50s. And then I could ease them in, and eventually maybe we could get early, get a jump start on the summer and start having some daylilies growing in here in the basement. And that's still an idea. But I went outside yesterday and realized that was not a good idea for yesterday. The ground is hard as a brick bat. It was freezing cold, howling wind, and I was not bothering with any of that yesterday. So all I wound up actually doing was topping off the tank. Now, the reason I'd let it get so low was because I have recently put some temple plant in here, and that plant where I took it from had already been growing emergent. In other words, the leaves were already up and out of the water, and they were what you could think of as its terrestrial growth. They were leaves that were used to being exposed to atmospheric gases. And so when you submerge those kind of leaves, they're not the leaves that have developed underwater, and they're simply not adapted to that. And a lot of times it'll shock the plant, the leaves will fall off, and a lot of times the plant can't really recover from that. So by allowing it to the water level to go low like that, I was keeping at least some of the top leaves out of the water, and I don't really think we suffered too much damage. You can actually see some new growth. Some of these smaller, sort of brighter colored leaves are new growth that are starting to come in. We're even getting some new growth up here on the top. So I think that's going to take. I think it's going to be okay, and I'm happy about that. My Ludwigia over here that I planted is doing really well. That's growing nicely. You can even see some of it's growing all the way around and coming out over here. And my I'm just going to trim this up. I actually did lift this yesterday. This is still in its planter that I bought it in. That's just a little disposable pot. It comes in from the garden center, and I just stuck it in there. It's wet on the bottom, and it just wicks the moisture up through it, and that's obviously more than enough. But it's got some dead leaves on there, and I need to get them trimmed off and so on and so forth. But all this brown dying crap and some of this green stuff here is Creeping Jenny that I got from the reservoir over the summer. And it doesn't look good, but it's not dead either. Actually, some of this growth over here looks pretty good. And now that I've got it down here, all this stuff was growing like through the fern. And I pulled that all out, and now it's down in the water and has little rootlets starting to develop on it. So I don't know if that's actually going to do anything or not, but we're gonna wait and find out what happens with that. And then there's also other bulbs and stuff that I could dig up out in the yard when the weather warms up enough for the ground not to be frozen solid. Maybe I can go out there and pick something else out and we can get it in here and maybe get some early spring action started. you know, get a jump on nature. Otherwise, I haven't really done anything to this. I still do need to get in there and do another round of gravel vacuuming. The mulm in this tank builds up very quickly. As far as my foot tank goes, I did add some water. I topped it off a little bit. I very seldom do water changes on this tank. I've actually got it set up where it sort of denitrifies itself. I have a very deep sand bed off to this side. Underneath all those rocks is about a 5 or 6 inch deep sand bed, and that actually serves to denitrify the tank as far as I can tell. I never have any nitrates in it, no matter how long I let it sit there. I never get a nitrate reading on it, so I assume that I am denitrifying the tank. But I did top it off. I did sort of scrape away some of the snails and crud that was on front of the intake to the pump there, so you can now see I've got a good solid water flow again. And the water's actually a little bit cloudy now that I've got it all up and running again, which is unusual for this tank. It usually just sits there and ticks over like a clock, crystal clear. And yet once I added some water and got the flow going again nice and vigorously, it's kind of cloudy. Who knows, maybe it's just stirring up a bunch of detritus. There's probably a 6 inch deep, you know, it's probably that deep on the bottom of just detritus and mulm over here because it's been sitting so long. Again, I never really do water changes or vac this tank or anything. It just sits there and ticks over like a clock without issue. So let's get these lights turned off so they don't glare up all the rest of the videos. And we will move around here, being careful not to step on my space heater that I got running because it's a chilly morning today. So with 29 miscellaneous, nothing really to talk about in this tank. My regular viewers will know that I lost my angelfish in this tank. It's been a while since that. I probably talked about that in my last Round the World update. And since then, nothing has happened. I haven't done anything at all with this tank. I've probably topped the water off once or twice. And that's about it. I don't even think I've changed the filter pads in this tank. I get so tired of changing them because almost immediately after changing them, the water starts flowing right down through that center again. And it just doesn't really matter. As long as I've got water circulation and good water flow swirling around the tank, it's fine. You don't see crud and just, you know, detritus and stuff on the bottom of the tank. Everything looks good. Could probably get in there and wipe down the front glass. That wouldn't hurt. And of course, doing a water change wouldn't hurt either. But I just haven't gotten around to doing one. The Nubius looks good. You can see that on the right-hand side here. This is all growing nice and lush. And I've even got some nice, decent new growth coming out on my Java fern right there. So let me go ahead and turn this space heater off before my legs are well done. They're currently at medium rare, and I think we're going to leave them at that. So getting on to my 55-gallon Gourami tank. First of all, that purple stuff you see is not purple. I know I've been over this before, but if you're new to my videos, that is just the red cyanobacteria. But it actually, to my eye, if you were standing here in front of the tank, has much more of a sort of a rusty, brownish, reddish, orange kind of color than that sort of weird purple that shows up on camera for some reason. Again, I'm just fascinated by why that looks so purple on camera. So that's just crud growing on the glass. It's really taken off within the last few days. I looked at it last week, sometime mid last week, 3 or 4 days ago, and I was thinking I needed to get in there and maybe wipe down some of the glass. I was seeing some of this kind of growth, this little sort of algae growing on it, and then a little bit of this brown stuff, you know, or purple stuff started taking over, and it's been like 3 or 4 days, and boom, it looks like this already. So that'll probably be my next water change. Get in here and do this tank, get that glass wiped down. Other than that, nothing going on. Haven't done anything with this tank. No water changes, no nothing. Haven't lost any fish, haven't added any fish, and everything is just ticking over nice and smooth and normal. Same goes for my 55-gallon tank. I really do need to put this on my list of tanks to start thinking about doing some chemi-clean treatment. I'm still working on some other tanks. We'll talk about that as we get around to them. But as of yet, I have not attempted to do any kind of cleaning on this tank as far as the cyanobacteria is concerned. It really started getting in there not too long ago, probably a couple of months ago. And since then, you can see it's just got that, you know, this green sheeting stuff growing all over everything in there. So we are going to wait and see what a ChemiClean treatment will do for that. In fact, I might actually purchase some Ultralife. Ultralife is a product that does basically the same thing as ChemiClean. I used to use Ultralife, and I think what happened was when I found that the cyanobacteria just kept coming back, I decided I was going to try something other than the Ultralife, and I was going to try ChemiClean to see if that worked any better. And my initial experience with the ChemiClean was a really good one. I thought that, like, oh, wow, that really did it, you know? And so I've just been using ChemiClean ever since. But obviously, I'm getting long-term, I'm getting the same results as I got with the Ultralife. It knocks it out, everything looks great, and then in time, it just comes back. So again, I've given up really worrying about trying to prevent it. And at this point, I just see it as part of my everyday maintenance, the same as cleaning algae off the glass. I just, you know, my tanks get cyanobacteria in them, and I have to clean that out too from time to time. And doing one of those treatments, whether it's ChemiClean or Ultralife, just really isn't that big of a deal to me. It's far easier than banging my head against the wall trying to keep the stuff out of my tank. It just doesn't work. Did that, tried that, been there, done that, gave up long ago. So there you go. So maybe we'll try the Ultralife and just see if there's any kind of difference, or if we notice anything, you know, because I'm always promoting and going on about the ChemiClean. So maybe we'll try the Ultralife this time and see if it doesn't have any kind of a different impact or whatever. I suspect it's probably just about the same thing. They probably tweak the ingredients just enough that they're not crossing over each other's patents and copyrights and whatnot. But it's probably still basically an E-mycin based type treatment. So we'll have to see what happens with that. Anyway, nothing really going on in that tank, just a little bit of a look at it. Likewise here with my 40 breeder. Still just ticking over like a clock. Everybody's in there doing their thing. I have noticed that one of the rubber lips that is in this tank is getting really big. When I first started buying rubber lips years ago, I always used to read that their maximum size was like 6 inches or 7 inches. And I used to just scoff at that because that's ridiculous. I've never seen a rubber lip get anywhere near that size. But I've also never seen a rubber lip that's 15 years old. You know, I don't know how old they live, and maybe eventually they do get really big like that. The ones I've seen tend to start getting sort of fatter and broader at the head as they age rather than getting longer. So having one that was 6 inches or something, I think would be pretty big. So I'm still thinking rubber lips probably top out around 4 or 5 inches, but their body will get broad and their head will get big and fat. And that's what's happening to the one that I've got in here. Every now and again, I've noticed it. I always seem to see it on this rock in the back, and I never get a really good look at it compared to the other ones. But it looks like one of the rubber lips I have in here is really substantial. And for all I know, it could be one of the original rubber lips that I put in this tank way back when I started it up. So that would put it at probably 8 years old now. I doubt it really is that old, but it's probably 4 or 5 years old. I wouldn't be surprised. So I've got one rubber lip in there that I really want to try to get a good look at one of these days. Otherwise, this is still just on my list to get in there and do something with someday. But there's nothing wrong with the tank, and it doesn't even look terribly bad, but it does need some cleaning up. Everything, all the plants are getting stunted, and the growth is just getting almost like dwarfed almost, or again, it's just stunted. It doesn't look right. So I need to get in there. I don't need to do a major rescape necessarily, but thinning out the plants a little bit and just getting the tank overall cleaned up, maybe modernized a little bit. I don't know, we'll see. But otherwise, nothing going on with that. Just thought I'd give everybody a nice, good look at it for a few minutes. My 125-gallon New World tank is definitely in need of some maintenance. I need to wipe the glass down. Would not hurt to change the filter on this tank. This tank produces a ton of mulm and detritus and waste material. You can see I at the very least need to do a top off. I took the spray bar off of this tank long ago to give me more of a vigorous current and flow that I can aim directionally, and so that's just the inlet from my Sun filter with no spray bar on it, and I just have it blowing that way. Now normally that's underwater and it's just creating current with some ripples on the surface or whatever, but now the water level's so low it's actually doing that. And again, it's fine, but it's not how it's supposed to be. I don't like my tanks to have that gap between. I don't like seeing that gap. I like the water to be behind that black line. I want all water, no air. So fish-wise, I have lost a few fish in this tank, and that is mainly because I found a couple of these little guys dried up on the floor in the morning. I did find one that when I picked it up, it weakly moved its gills a little bit, and it was all covered in hair and, you know, dried up on the floor. But I threw it back in the tank, and I have not yet seen a dead fish in there, so I don't know if it survived and recovered or not, but it doesn't appear to have died. But I did lose a couple that way that I threw in the trash can, so I know for a fact that it's dead. And I also, in this tank, have planted a chunk of that temple plant. You can see right here. When I pulled the main mass out of the bucket, I showed you earlier in the waterfall tank that I collected that piece. I said some of it was growing emergent. Well, the bulk of the plant was under the water, but it didn't really have any growth on it. It just had a lot of roots on it. So I cut that into two pieces. One of them is right there where you see it, and I'm really hoping that at this internodal section, or at this node here, we will get some growth developing, or possibly, I don't believe this is a node, but it could be, and we might get some growth developing off of that. Otherwise, sort of underneath of this where I planted it, there's one or two more sections that could be thought of as nodes that might develop some new growth, and that would be really cool to see a temple plant, you know, shooting up and sticking out of the water right there. It'd also be interesting to see what the silver dollars do to a temple plant growing in there. My suspicion is that they would make short work of it, and it would be a temple plant salad for them. And we would never ever achieve that temple plant growing emergent because the silver dollars are probably going to munch it up before that ever happens. But we'll see. I don't know. We'll find out. That noise you're hearing is just my power head down at this end of the tank, and it is likewise being exposed above the water. So again, at the very least, I need to throw a hose in there today and top this tank off if I don't do the full water change. My snail tank, I showed this to some people in a video last week. It's about time to get in here and change my living filter. It's getting really, really overgrown. Looks like I need to wipe down the lens of my camera too. So you can see the water is still kind of moving through there. It is being pumped up and it is flowing into the little tray here, but instead of having a piece of, you know, material for a filter, you know, a piece of polyfloss or something, I've just got Java moss growing in there, and so it's really functioning as a living filter. It really is. Not only is it filtering the physical debris and everything, it works great for filtering any kind of biologicals out of there. It sucks up any ammonia that might be produced. It sucks up any nitrates that are produced. I'm actually going to do a nitrate test on this tank now that I'm thinking about it. It's going to be bright red. It's got to be. It's got to be through the roof. I cannot imagine the that Java moss gobbling up nitrates to that extent. And you can see that mat hangs pretty far down into the water. So it's a big old chunk of Java moss there. I really like that. And then of course you can see how many actual snails I've got. These are all big snails, so I'm finally getting ahead of myself on the snail population, but I've been dumping loads of food in there to do it. And again, I think we're probably going to have pretty high nitrates on that tank when we get around to testing it. So this is one of the tanks that's worth spending a little time talking about. Recently I went down to the stream, I caught some more sculpins, and I also caught some darters, and I put them in this tank. And unfortunately, I don't think any of them survived. I've not seen any living darters or sculpins since I put them in the tank. I have found some dead ones, and I'm really sad to say that yesterday I found the tank just kept smelling off. It smelled like something was dead in there, and upon investigation I moved some leaves around down here, and under the leaves was a nasty, bloated, decaying sculpin that was big enough that I think it was the one that we had been watching recently, the one that I thought I was having some pretty good success with. So I think even that sculpin I was feeding, and we were actively watching it eat those bloodworms, I still think that one died as well. I don't think I have any sculpins or darters left in the tank. I did lose one crayfish, and I have only been able to spot two crayfish simultaneously within the last I don't know, a week or so, maybe 5 days to a week, I've only seen 2 crayfish out at the same time. So I don't know if I'm down to only 2 crayfish or not. All along, I expected I'd be down to 1 crayfish eventually. And I know it looks like there's no fish in the tank except for the odd one you see darting here and there. But there's actually quite a lot of fish still in this tank. I have found 1 or 2 on the floor in front of this tank as well. That is just a risk you take with an open top tank. There's not a lot you can do to avoid it. Even fish that are not known to be jumpers can jump, and they will jump occasionally. And if they get startled or spooked, or another fish is near them and they're at the surface and they get startled, they jump. They got nowhere to go except up, and they go right up and out of the tank sometimes. So it does happen. And again, I've lost a couple in that regard. It was again those little striped Notropus species. I haven't lost any of the mosquito fish that way. So there is still probably 15 mosquito fish, along with some of the other fish that are in here that I'm not sure of the species of. I did catch 1 little fish that I believed to be a small white suckerfish, and I've not seen that one since I put it in the tank. And that one was big enough that if that died, I'd smell it after a few days. That's a big enough fish that it would be noticeable if it died. It was maybe, it was bigger than what you would get as like maybe think of full-grown cory cat. It was about that size. And so something that big, if it died in this tank and was, in there decomposing, it would probably float eventually because of gases developing, or at the very least, it would stink. And once I got that sculpin out of there yesterday, I don't smell stink in this tank anymore. It smells nice and clean and clear. And so I don't know if that fish is hiding, if it got devoured completely already. I mean, that's a possibility, but I've not seen that white suckerfish since I put it in this tank, and that's kind of bumming me out. I was really hoping we'd get to enjoy that one. And we may still. It may just be hiding underneath the rocks. I don't know. It's a small enough fish that it could be hiding in a lot of places in that tank. So, my theory as to why I'm not having any luck with those other fish is not really a complicated one. It's warm water and low oxygen levels, or at least low oxygen levels compared to what these fish are used to. If you'll notice, if you remember, if you joined me on the video where we caught those fish, you will notice that I very specifically went to fast-flowing, sort of rapid water, and I kicked over the stones and rocks and everything, and that's where we collected them. I didn't collect them out of deep, slow-moving pools. I collected them out of cold, fast-flowing water. And so even though this tank is room temperature, it's still much, much warmer than they're used to. I don't know whether it's too warm for them to survive in, but it's certainly warmer than they're used to, and it holds a lot less oxygen than they're used to. And of course, with the water being so still, it's going to hold even less oxygen. So I can imagine the darters and the sculpin not surviving in this tank for no other reason than lack of oxygen levels. And as far as their food source, I'm not 100% sure. I don't know if those sculpins can live on, bloodworms alone, and that was bloodworms and brine shrimp was pretty much its only diet. And I don't think that would be enough to keep it sustained for very long. So I'm debating whether or not to keep trying and get any more. I really, at this point, feel like I'm just bringing fish home to watch them die. And, I don't want to do that. But those sculpins are so cool. I really, really like those sculpins a lot. And those darters are really cool, too. So maybe I will reserve that for a tank where I'm going to set it up specifically where I've got faster moving water, or maybe I'll redesign this tank. I've got a really big power head in the other room. I could put it in this tank and turn it into a virtual whirlpool. But again, would that be enough? I don't know. Maybe put an air stone in here. That's a possibility. Maybe I could try that, do an air stone in the corner. I don't know. We'll see. The other thing that has crossed my mind because of the dead crayfish, and the dead crayfish really resembled a crayfish that looked like it was attempting to molt but was unable to and died. It had the split across the back and everything. So I really think it died during the molting process, and that makes me wonder why, because they don't come from hard water. I know a lot of people say, oh, well, you need to have calcium in the water, or they're, because of their shells and everything, but the water they come from doesn't have calcium in it. They get the calcium from their diet, and I'm giving them a diet that gives them plenty of calcium, and yet it still gave the appearance of dying from trouble molting. So if that's the case, it's got me wondering if my tannins in this tank don't have something to do with that, because I know tannic acid will interact with hard water, and you can soften hard water with lots and lots of tannic acid, or tannin, if you will. So maybe, even though this is soft water and the water I caught them in is soft water, maybe not all soft water is the same. Maybe this soft water that also has a lot of tannin in it played a role in that crayfish not doing well, because the stream where I caught them does have soft water, but it doesn't have tea-stained water, and this tank has tea-stained water. And this is even, I did a pretty big water change probably a week ago, and you can see how tea-stained that water is already. So perhaps that had something to do with that crayfish not being able to molt successfully. And again, this is all speculation. I don't even know if that's why it died. It just gives the appearance of having died due to those kinds of complications. So I don't know. But maybe doing more frequent water changes on this just to keep the tannins down might be beneficial. Could the tannins have had some impact on the fish that died, all those sculpins and darters? I don't know. I wouldn't imagine it would. In fact, tannin actually has antimicrobial and antibacterial properties, so it's actually usually good for fish to be in water that has tannic acid in it or tannin in it. So I don't know, but that's what's going on with this tank. Like I said, kind of had a lot to go over there, but that's what's going on. No fruits of our labors. For collecting fish, they're all dead. I mean, it was fun going out and doing it, but they're all dead now, and I've definitely lost a crayfish. So we're going to have to wait and see whether we ever see that white suckerfish or not. I'm really, really hoping we do. And if I do, and of course, if I've got the opportunity to get it on camera, I certainly will. So make sure you're subscribed. You won't miss that or anything else. So moving on. Probably should have just done that tank by itself. But moving on. My 125-gallon tank is getting a little on the overgrown side. It's about time to get in here and do some more whackety chop and give this tank a big fat haircut, because it really needs it. I mean, it really needs it. And it really wasn't that long ago that I got in there and did that. The only real sort of open space in the tank is this far end, and this is where most of the fish hang out most of the time. So it's a lot of tank, and most of it is just filled with plants. Otherwise, not much going on in here. Haven't really done anything, made any changes in this tank. Haven't lost any fish or anything since the last time I did any kind of maintenance or water change or anything like that. We've talked about it, so not a lot going on in here. Just always enjoy this tank and like spending a few minutes looking at it. I still want to take the Siamese algae eaters out of my, well, 2 of them anyway. I've got 4 of them in my 40 breeder, and I want to pull 2 of them out and put them in here, because it's not terrible and overgrown, but you can see I do have hair algae growing on stuff, and not many things will eat that hair algae, but true Siamese algae eaters, not the flying foxes, and certainly not the Chinese algae eaters, but the Siamese algae eaters will devour that green hair algae. Again, not a big deal. It's actually getting less and less. It was getting a little out of control for a while, but it seems to be swinging back into being a little more under control now. Not sure why that is, but I'm not complaining about it. But having those Siamese algae eaters in this tank would prevent that from ever happening. So there you go, just a quick look at my 125. This is another tank that needs a little bit of discussion. This is my 20-gallon angelfish tank, and we can actually see my angelfish out there a little bit. I've lost 1 fish in this tank since I started doing a chemiclean treatment on it, and that was my whiptail, or my Farlowella catfish, sometimes called twig catfish or whiptail catfish. And I don't know if I killed it because of the chemiclean treatment. I am doing treatment of chemiclean right now in this tank, and I'll spare you all the details, but I did a really, really big dose of the chemiclean for the purposes of doing a video. I really overdosed it, and within a couple days I had this dead fish, but I don't 100% know if there was a correlation to it or not. So a few days later, I started noticing one of my cherry barbs was behaving a little bit unusually, and I've been watching her. I did an update about her. I don't actually see her at the moment. Of course not. I know you see a cherry barb, but that is not the cherry barb that I'm looking for. and I don't see her anywhere. Wow, she's probably dead, and she's going to come floating up in the middle of this video as I'm trying to explain to everybody how she's not as bad off as I originally thought. Anyway, I don't see her anywhere at the moment. We'll have to wait and see if she makes an appearance. But at first I thought, I've got a second fish that's dying, and over time I realized that I think it's just she's got a swim bladder issue. She's an old fish, and having swim bladder issues is just something that seems to happen to older fish. That's kind of been my experience. I've had a lot of fish that as they age, they start developing these swim bladder issues, not unlike pretty much every animal that as it ages, it starts having more and more issues with its internal functioning, and swim bladder seems to be one of those things that goes up on fish as they age. So that's all that I think is really wrong with her, is some swim bladder issues. She spends a lot of time just kind of sitting on the bottom of the tank. She swims around sometimes, she comes up for food, swims around normal, and then she just goes back down and sits on the bottom of the tank. So even if she's dead now and I just can't find her in there, it doesn't change anything about the fact that I don't believe the ChemiClean had anything to do whatsoever. I think it was just total coincidence. I know there's a lot of people out there who tend to think like it's got to mean something, like everything means something. There is such a thing as coincidence. There really is. That just happened to happen at the same time this happened. There's not necessarily always a correlation between two things that happen. And in this case, I really think it was just coincidental that I happened to be doing a ChemiClean treatment when I noticed that she was swimming funny, because I've got a lot more sensitive fish in this tank. One of them, we just got a glimpse of his tail, but I've got a clown pleco under there, which I find to be extremely sensitive, and he's still doing fine. I've since done 3 more treatments of the ChemiClean. Just yesterday I put another dose in it, and was going to the day before yesterday I put another dose in it, and just this afternoon I intend to put still 1 more. We're getting very close to no cyanobacteria, but you can still see some little bits and pieces. Like if you look at the base of the heater right there, like right where the black rubber stopper part meets the glass, there's a little bit of bright green, and you can kind of see a spot here and there on the leaves where there's still some bright green. But by and large, we have gotten it down to where there's not much in the way of cyanobacteria. You can see on this piece of Anubias right here, and here there's still some dark green. There's a little bit of green in that mat on the back. So I'm getting really close to just getting it out of this tank, and I'm not going to stop until I've done it. Again, I'm going to be doing another one of these treatments. I have slowed down to not overdosing it the way I was. I still am giving it heavy doses, but I'm not giving it, triple size doses like I was before. But I probably am doing at least 1.5 to double dosing on it. And again, I don't fear for the safety of my fish at all. I think it was complete coincidence that my cherry barb became ill during this treatment. And again, I'm not sure whether the treatment would have contributed to that Farlawella's death. I've never had a lot of success with them in the past, so it had already lived far longer than any other Farlawella I had ever had before. So whether that had something to do with it or not, I don't know. But again, I'm not going to stop doing the treatment because I don't feel like it's hurting the fish at all. So take that for what you will. Moving on to I've been calling this my brackish tank, and I've been saying for a long time that I should probably stop calling it my brackish tank because I don't have brackish water in it anymore. It's just traditionally sort of been known as my brackish tank. I just turned the forward light on there if you're wondering why it lit up like that. But it was suggested to me by one of my longtime regular viewers that I should just start calling this Butterbean's tank. And I probably will, but at the same time, I'm just, first of all, in such a habit of calling it my brackish tank that I probably will call it that for a long time anyway. And secondly, I know it's silly and superstitious, but the moment I start calling this Butterbean's tank, Butterbean will die, and then I won't have Butterbean in the tank anymore, and I'll have to rename the tank again anyway. So I don't want to jinx poor little Butterbean to an early death there. He's at least 7 years old now. He is actually one of my earlier fish in my, early days of excitement of wanting to try everything and have one of every kind of fish. I saw these. I saw these down at House of Tropicals. and was so amazed with it, I decided I wanted to have one. And I found out that you needed to have a brackish aquarium for them. And I said, all right, that doesn't sound too hard. I grew up around brackish water. I'm pretty familiar with brackish environments. And so I set up a brackish tank, and that was it. I've had Butterbean ever since. So I've probably had him since 2013, maybe late 2012. Early 2012 was when I really like took off. That was like sort of my mental starting gun for getting involved with the fish keeping. So sometime by the end of 2012 or early 2013 would probably be when I got Butterbean. So there you go. Oh, I did add sand to this tank recently. I forgot we're supposed to be talking about what I'm actually doing in the tank. Did a big water change, got the glass wiped down. I removed a bunch of... oh, look, we've got a dead fish stuck to the intake. That's one of those little guppies. So during the water change, I vacked out a bunch of snail shells. I vacked out a bunch of dead Java, and I vacked out a bunch of cyanobacteria. And when I was done, I added a bunch of black sand. That is the same kind of sand. That is my... oh, I can't even think of the name of it now. It's the planted substrate stuff. It's like fluorite, but it's not. It's a different brand. It's Carib Sea. I cannot think of the brand name of that. It's Carib Sea is the brand. I can't think of the name of the product, though. But it's their planted substrate. It's the same stuff I have in all my other tanks that has that bimodal sort of black sand along with sort of black gravel. This is just the sand version of that. I used to have it in my gudgeon tank. And after I did the big water change in here, I just backfilled it with some of that sand. And over time, that sand will settle down into the lower portions and we'll start to see more of a gravelly appearance. But for now, we've got a nice sandy appearance on the bottom there. So there you go, everybody. Back to where we started, sort of. Had a long one this week. I think this is probably a record for me, pushing 40 minutes. Wow. All right, everybody, I'm going to say thanks for watching, not drag it out any longer. Make sure you're subscribed. I will see you real soon on the next one. And real quick, I will leave you with a look at the clown pleco that I have in this tank that we hardly ever get to see, but he is now out and on the glass back there. Those little plecos are worth their weight in gold when it comes to keeping a tank clean. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. See you on the next one.